Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm It's Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I am back with another tank guide, this time for the TR-580. This is an Era 2 Eastern Alliance medium tank, and this is the first Era 2 medium tank in this line. This comes after the TVP T50-51. It leads on to the TR-85, and then this line will end with the third Era 2 medium tank in this line at the TR-125, and I'll be doing tank guides of all of these tanks as I go up this line. So this tank is a little bit of an all-rounder, as we're going to see in today's video. I'm going to go over all of the stats of this vehicle over on Excel. We're going to be comparing it in today's video to the Type 79, the T62, the Leopard 1 and the Centurion Mark 9, other Era 2 medium tanks and the first medium tanks in their respective lines, to give you a good indication of how this tank stacks up. We're going to have a look at my commander and equipment setup, how it affects the stats of this tank, and then I have 3 gameplays for you at the end to show you how this tank performs. And we're also going to have a look at the armor viewer of the TR-580. So we're over here on Excel, and all of the aspects of this video will be timestamped, so you can skip forward to the section you feel will benefit you the most. But we're going to start off by looking at the stats and the comparison to the other tanks to see where it holds up, and then we're going to get going with the rest of the video. So here on the left is the stats of the TR-580, and the color coding, if you're not familiar with my tank guides, orange is somewhere in between, green's the best, red is the worst, and yellow is the highlighted stat with my updated command and equipment setup applied to it to show you how it improves the base stats of this vehicle. So we're going to get stuck straight in today with the hit points of the TR-580. It's 2,400. As you can see, it's an orange, so somewhere in between. Not quite as good as the Type 79 and the Centurion Mark 9, but it is better than the Leopard 1 and T62, and you're going to see a lot of orange on the TR-580 because it is a sort of all-rounder tank, somewhere in the middle of all of the stats of all of these tanks in most regards. And the real benefit to this tank is that it does have some armor and it's relatively easy to play, and I'll try and explain that for you in the gameplay at the end. So somewhere in between with the hit points, but more than enough to take a few shots. In terms of the view range, as we can see, 455 meters. That is not quite as good as tanks like the Centurion Mark 9, the Leopard 1 and the Type 79, but it is better than the T62, and you can boost that up to a respectable level. But with True Vision, and you are a relatively heavily armoured medium tank, kind of like a Heavium, then you're going to be trying to get stuck into the battle using your great side armour, side scraping, and that's not too much of an issue. Next, we're going to have a look at the mobility of the TR-580. As you can see here, it has a 830 horsepower engine, a 19.3 power to weight ratio. You can go 65.2 kilometers an hour forwards, 24.1 kilometers an hour in reverse. Your hold traverses at 44 degrees a second, and your turret traverse is relatively poor at 32 degrees a second. However, with gun handling skills, you can get it up to around 38 degrees a second, like you can see I have done here on the right with the updated stat highlighted in yellow. So as a comparison to the other tanks, in terms of all of the stats, it's somewhere in between. It's definitely not the worst and definitely not the best. It's comparable to something like a Type 79 in terms of its engine power, power to weight. Top forward speed's pretty decent. The top reverse speed is very nice. Not quite as good as the more mobile mediums like the Leopard 1 and Centurion Mark 9, but you do have that armor to back it up. So it's a very respectable mobility level for a tank with pretty nice side armor, pretty good turret armor, and pretty good hull armor. So you'll see the benefits of that armor as we talk about that a little bit later on. But in terms of the mobility, somewhere in between. It's better than the T62 by some way. Comparable to the rest of the tanks in this comparison, apart from things like the Leopard 1, which has insane mobility, but it is a glass cannon tank. Next, we're going to have a look at the gun of the TR-580. It has a 100mm gun, which is the lowest in this comparison. The Type 79, the Leopard 1 and the Centurion Mark 9 have 105mm guns, and the highest is the T62 with a 115mm gun. But it doesn't always correlate to your alpha damage in terms of what gun caliber you have. So let's have a look at the stats of the 100mm on the TR-580 and see how it holds up. So you fire APF SDS as your standard and your premium round, and your third round is an HE round. 1430 meters a second shell velocity on your standard APF SDS, 1475 meters a second on your premium APF SDS, and 900 meters a second on your HE. You have pretty poor penetration values, 376mm on your standard rounds, 419mm on your premium rounds, and 135mm of pen on your HE rounds. And you do have the lowest alpha damage in this comparison in terms of your standard and premium rounds at 440 alpha damage, and you have 580 alpha damage with your HE rounds, which is somewhere in the middle of all of these stats. But unfortunately, as you can see, there are quite a lot of stats here highlighted in red, meaning it's the worst in this comparison. You have two highlighted in orange, which are somewhere in between, and the only best you have is the shell velocity on your HE rounds at 900 meters a second. However, just because it's coloured in red in a comparison with other tanks doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. In terms of your standard shell velocity, 1430 meters a second is more than enough to be able to lead targets at mid to long distances, but you do have to bear in mind you have that horrific penetration. Comparing it to something like the Leopard 1, which is the best in this comparison in terms of standard pen, 449, you are absolutely way off in terms of that. So you definitely have to learn the weak spots, try and get around the sides and rears of the enemy tanks, and when you're brawling you still have to aim for your weak spots because that penetration is pretty poor. In terms of the shell velocity on your premium rounds, again it jumps up by a little bit, meaning it's better at aiming at mid to long distances. You don't have to give too much lead, but you do have a lot of penetration drop off with APF SDS rounds, so definitely bear that in mind, because again that is the worst in this comparison in terms of the premium penetration. HE rounds, best shell velocity, 135mm. You definitely can penetrate on quite a few of the light tanks, so definitely carry a few just in case. And you do have a nice 580 alpha damage, which is relatively high for a 100mm caliber gun. But unfortunately, this is sort of the downside in terms of the TR-580. You have relatively decent mobility, and the gun handling and DPM you'll see in a bit isn't too bad at all. It's just the alpha damage is very low, and you do have pretty poor penetration. So it's a good tank to get stuck in up close and personal, try and side scrape, learn the weak spots, and it does train you to actually aim rather than having to just auto lock and snap on, because this tank definitely isn't the one for you. You will struggle to contest the front of the more heavily armoured tanks in Era 2, like the FV4 211, tanks like that. So yeah, hopefully I can give you some more tricks in the gameplay at the end. But it does go to show that the mobility and the lack of armour on the Leopard 1 and the Centurion 9 as well, you do have that better gun performance, better penetration especially, and alpha damage, but you don't have the armour that this tank has. In terms of alpha damages, just to note, the T62 with its higher caliber 115mm gun does have that nice 520 alpha damage on its standard rounds, drops down to 500 on its heat rounds, and it does have HE rounds of 630 damage, so that's the king in this comparison. Leopard 1 the best for the penetration, and of course the TR-580 is lacking behind the other tanks in this comparison. In terms of the gun handling then, as we skip on down and have a look at the gun handling of all of these tanks, again a lot of orange for the TR-580, so that means that it is somewhere in the middle. A 2.1 second aim time isn't too bad at all, not quite as good as the Leopard 1, however that's to be expected, that's a glass cannon tank with a laser accurate gun. You have a 0.33 accuracy, the same as the Type 79. Not quite as good as the Centurion Mark 9, which is the best at 0.28, or the Leopard 1, which is 0.31, but it is better than the T62, which has that higher caliber 115mm caliber gun. Again, DPM 3,300. It's better than the Type 79, which is the worst in this comparison. Just a little bit behind the T62 with that big 115mm caliber gun. And it's only a little bit off of the Leopard 1 and Centurion Mark 9, which have brilliant DPMs of 3,491 and 3,409 respectively. So yeah, not too bad in terms of the gun handling and the DPM of this tank. As you have a 3,300 DPM, it means you have an 8-second reload for that 440 alpha damage, and I've got mine down to 5.99 seconds, and I'll show you how I did that in just a bit. Ammo capacity 50, it's the same as the Type 79, better than the T62 but not quite as good as the Leopard 1 and Centurion Mark 9. And now we're going to get on to the gun depression. It has 5 degrees, which is pretty poor for an Era 2 medium tank, but you do have some armour to back it up. It's better than the Type 79 and the T62, which is at a horrific 3 degrees. But it is going to be a long way off the Leopard 1 and Centurion Mark 9, but you can make the 5 degrees work. You just have to make sure you're using the ridgelines that are a little bit smaller. This is quite a low profile tank with turret armour that can bounce a few rounds, so definitely look for those small ridgelines. It's not going to be good on higher ridges. You're going to have to try and find different positions to try and flank your enemies. And you have 18 degrees of gun elevation, better than the Type 79 and T62, a little way off of the Leopard 1 and the same as the Centurion Mark 9. So all in all, for this tank, it doesn't look fantastic because you have that horrific penetration, but you do have nice shell velocity. You do have APF SDS as your second ammunition selection, which is good in my opinion because heat is very hard to use against all of the ERA and composite armour that protects against heat, ATGM and HE ammunition. So that's a plus point in my book. Just be wary of that poor penetration. 440 alpha damage. It still does chunk your opponents down because you have a relatively good DPM of 3,300. Nice aim time, pretty decent accuracy. You can get down to a very nice level. The mobility is absolutely fine for the armor that your tank has, and your hit points in view range are pretty standard. So a kind of all-rounder tank in that regard. Let's have a look at my commander and equipment setup and how that affects the stats of this vehicle, and then we'll have a look at the armor of the TR-580. So in terms of equipment on the TR-580, I choose to run improved ventilation, advanced loader and gun stabilizer. And in terms of my commander, I run 6th Sense, Spawn Leader, rapid loading, steady aim, rapid aim, snapshot, run and gun, armor angling and track mechanics. So a very standard setup there you've seen me use on quite a few medium tanks. In terms of the commander skill, 6th Sense and Born Leader is standard, rapid loading to help the DPM out. Then I have those 4 gun handling skills to try and help the gun handling of this tank out. And with the poor penetration, you want to make your gun as accurate and well behaved as possible, so when you're aiming for those weak spots, you don't miss. Armor angling, because you're going to be a more brawling style medium tank and you want to reduce the damage you take by 5%. And track mechanic, because of that gun depression, it can be awkward to use the gun depression on this tank, so you can sometimes find yourself caught in weird positions. Trying to get your gun down and getting your tracks on is imperative, and that gives you a 25% increase to your track repair speed. In terms of the equipment, again, improved ventilation, it helps all crew performance by 5%. I want to make my gun better, view range better, gun handling better, all of that. In terms of the advanced loader, improving my load time by 10% and gun stabilizer to help the accuracy when I'm moving and rotating my turret. In terms of consumables, large med, large repair kit, and I run the enhanced smoke screen because I want to get out of harm's way if I get caught out in a bad position trying to use the pretty mediocre 5 degrees of gun depression. And that's it for my command and equipment setup. How does that affect the stats of the TR-580? In terms of the view range, it's gone from 455 meters to 484, which is a little boost. In terms of mobility, I don't run any mobility pieces of equipment. You definitely could consider taking one of the equipment slots out, maybe the ventilation or maybe the loader if you'll want to invest in the mobility. But with the gun handling skills, it does boost your turret traverse up. So mine's gone from 32 degrees a second to 37.98 degrees a second, so essentially 38 degrees a second. So that's a nice bonus for the TR-580. And lastly, in terms of the gun handling and DPM, I've now got an aim time of 1.97 seconds from 2.1. The accuracy's dropped quite a long way from 0.33 to 0.27, which is just slightly better than the base stat of the Centurion Mark 9's 0.28. In terms of the DPM, it's gone from 3,300 to 4,409, which is a nice increase indeed. And of course, if you felt comfortable brawling in this tank and didn't want to run an enhanced smokescreen for those sticky situations, you could use the combat rations, and that would of course boost all of these stats up, including the DPM. But it now means that I have a reload of 5.99 seconds, essentially 6 seconds for that 440 alpha damage. So I'm not gonna go into the garage and do a garage review with you of the armor. We're going to talk about it here, and I'm going to put some screenshots up for you to talk about the TR-580's armor. So the thickest part is around the gun and a little bit in front of your cupola, 380mm. So if you're looking up at this tank and trying to shoot the right cupola, you can get caught out by that little sort of viewport section that can block your shot, so definitely watch out for that. The next strongest section is this 320mm section across the left and right of the gun and underneath the gun, so relatively strong, and it is slightly rounded, as you can see, so at an angle that definitely can ricochet some shots off if you find a nice ridge line. Then you have this 280mm band to the further left and right of the turret, and again it's a rounded turret, a very sort of Eastern Alliance looking turret, so that's going to be bouncing some shells at angles, and that's definitely something you want to avoid if you have poor penetration. The next thing to note is you have a 200mm upper plate, and when you're angling at a 40 to 45 degree angle, that can definitely ricochet some shells. So what you want to do is try and wiggle back and forwards as much as possible when you're on the move, and hopefully tanks can ricochet off you. And when you're coming around corners, if you're not side scraping, come around at a 45 degree angle. Hopefully they won't aim for your tracks and penetrate right through. They'll go and shoot your upper plate and they'll bounce off. The other things to note on this tank is that you have two cupolas, I should say, 150mm a piece to the left and right. The next thing I think that you should know about this tank is the 100mm lower plate, which is a relatively strong lower plate against low caliber rounds or low penetration rounds. And if you're angling at a 45 degree angle coming around a corner, this can definitely ricochet a few shells, and if you get lucky, and especially against lightly armored tanks. The only other things to know about the armor on the TR-580 is you have very nice 80mm of armor on the sides, meaning you can side scrape very nicely indeed, and there's nothing that you're going to come across that will be able to penetrate your sides when you're side scraping, unless they hit the side of your turret or you over angle, or they're firing ATGMs or HE, which will splash you. And you do also have some nice protection over the sides of this tank. You have these side skirts here, which are 6mm, that protects against ATGMs and HE ammunition and heat ammunition from the side. So when you're side scraping, you can absorb quite a few rounds, and light tanks that try and derp you in the side can get caught out. And you also have 6mm of spaced armor to the sort of rear left and rear right of the turret, which can block some damage from ATGMs and sometimes block them altogether, which can come in handy. You want to watch out for, though, you are a fairly large profile tank from the side, and if you give too much of it, you will get your hit points taken off very quickly indeed. Tanks can track and pen you from the front and from the rear, so definitely watch out for that, especially when you're trying to come around corners. I would recommend side scraping at every opportunity in this tank, trying to make the most of the armor. Angle it 45 degrees when you're on the move, and it's a pretty robust medium tank, fairly easy one to use, more of a heavium tank. You brawling in a medium tank, trying to make the most of the poor penetration. So that's it in terms of the armor for the TR-580. We are now going to head over and get stuck into the first of 3 gameplays. So here we are in the first gameplay. We are here on Nomonhan in the TR-580. We are in a standard battle, and we have spawned in the northeastern corner, and I'm going to rush down the A and B lines and get into a position to try and spot tanks that are situated on the hill where I've just pinged in E3, and you're going to get a nice indication of the mobility as we get going here. You can see that we are in the lead. A lot of it's due to the fact I know where I wanted to go immediately on this map, and that does help in any tank, but it's a pretty decent mobility for some relatively good armour on a sort of all-rounder medium tank that can brawl a little bit. The gun isn't too bad if you take away the poor penetration, and you definitely can make that 5 degrees of gun depression work. So I've come to this location here. I originally did ping in E3, but I've come to B4, and this looks like the sort of smallest slope for me to be able to try and wedge my tank up at the front and get some nice shots across at tanks that are sniping in the sort of E2 to E3 location. And we're already getting a little bit of assistance for our view range here, and we've already got one shot of damage. And I'm always trying to find the lowest kind of ridgeline that I can get in this tank to try and make it as easy as possible to use the poor 5 degrees of gun depression. I quickly came over here to try and help up this BMP to take out the other enemy light tank. It's always good to get light tanks out at the start of the game, because if you have vision control when there are less tanks on the battlefield, you usually have the chance to use that as a benefit and take down the game. So I'm being a little bit careful here. I'm trying not to peek too much. It can be very tempting to peek too much because of your poor 5 degrees of gun depression. But we've now tempted this Leopard 1A1 around, and now we're going to take full advantage as he goes after our light tank. And he regrets his decision very quickly and goes back to the garage. And just being in a location like this where you are being a bit of a nuisance, spotting tanks out, just peeking. I'm not trying to lose too many hit points if I can help it at the start of the battle. Trying to keep vision up for my teams that are sniping, or teammates that are sniping, I should say, at the back. And just playing that kind of heavium style gameplay, getting forward. I'm using the turret armor here where possible. If I feel like I'm going to take a shot, I'm trying to wiggle, angle it 45 degrees, bounce some shells, and this just feels like a very easy tank to play, pretty comfortable. You can get used to that 5 degrees of gun depression, and yeah, you can have some very nice results in this tank. So again, I felt like I was getting too sort of close to comfort to the enemy there, so we're going to fall back, try and bait some of these tanks around into the open where we do have some support from our tanks. We're going to make sure we're aiming our shots, because you don't want to ricochet even against light tanks. And now that light tank's trying to escape, we're going to come round, make sure we take our time to aim, free aim there, give some lead, and with the nice shell velocity we take out that mauler, and that's another dangerous light tank taken out of the battlefield. And we are now up by 3 tanks, and the game looks pretty much in our favour. We've got all of the tanks here pincered into this 1, 2, 3 and 4 line, and now I'm just taking opportunities here on this ridge line to get shots off where possible. And if you have the sides in the rear of tanks, the penetration isn't a problem. We're looking down on that FV4 to 11, so I know I could go through the cupola around sort of 60% of the time. We bounce off that MOBAT as we do snap that shot a little bit, and now we're just falling back, trying to make our turret armour as angled as possible in case that MOBAT catches us, and trying to block a little bit of damage. And you're going to see the sort of game results you expect in a tank with a sort of mediocre gun, pretty decent armour and pretty decent mobility. You're going to get some nice damage, a little bit of assistance, and block a little bit as well. And it's just a very nice all-round medium tank, and a pretty decent start to this line in Era 2. And I'm definitely looking forward to the next 2 tanks in this line. So in this game here on Nomonhan, we are now obliterating the enemy, and it's time to try and get the last remaining dregs of assistance and damage out of this game. I only have 541 hit points, but if I was to be taken out now, it wouldn't be too much of an issue. We went for the drive wheel there of that FE4 to 11, trying to track him in place, but the shot flew high and it went through his weak spot, which is the middle section underneath his gun on the upper plate. And it shows that if you do get the weak spots, even though that one was unintentional, you can penetrate even with the poor penetration. And of course, against tanks like the 30B2 Farad, we can just auto-lock, and most of the time we're going to be going through, and I'm auto-locking there because I'm on the move trying to avoid fire from the enemy and try and stay in the game. But we take that one down with the help of our teammates, pick up a profit with or at a premium account, first class mastery badge, second on our team, 1366 basic XP, 2 kills, 5k damage, 715 assistance, and 640 blocked. And we're going to move on into the second game and see how we can get on there. Welcome to the second gameplay of today's video. We are here on Heilbronn in the TR-580, and I believe this gameplay was from around Christmas time. I do have the upgraded turret, but I think I am either going towards the next tank or I have the stock gun, and looking at the reload time I believe I do have the stock gun in this replay, so you can see how this tank performs when it is a little bit stock. Here on Heilbronn I'm going to rush into the centre, try and get to the hills in front of me and get some vision out for our team, but there are quite a few light tanks that like to YOLO in Era 2, and of course there are a couple coming after me at the start of this battle, so I pop the smoke screen there to try and avoid any 80 GM fire, and then we're going to be trying to brawl with this light tank. You can see that the TR-580 moves relatively nicely for a slightly larger medium tank with some armour, and now we're just trying to make the most of this gun, take out this Scorpion 90. Unfortunately, we do manage to track the Scorpion 90, but he repairs just in time as we're going in for a bit of a ram. And if you notice, I'm getting circled here, but I'm trying to keep moving to try and make myself as hard to hit. And I'm always free aiming my shots at tanks that are circling me, because auto aiming means I'm just going to be firing behind the tanks that are coming at me. So I'm going into sniper, I'm taking it off of the enhanced sniper, and then I'm just aiming in front using the pretty decent shell velocity to try and hit my targets when I'm on the move. We avoid an 80 GM there from what looked like that BMP-1. We get a very lucky snapshot there, but I'm just wiggling, trying to bounce shells if possible, trying to make the most of this armour, and we're going to retreat to the safety of this hill and this rock and get a bit of respite. It's a very risky location going to those hills directly in front of us, but you can get some nice assistance early on. And in a tank with a little bit of turret armour and a little bit of side and hull armour, I thought it would be worth the risk going forward, trying to get a bit of vision. You can't always account for light tanks that are coming after you, but you can try and drag them towards your teammates. I immediately turned around and try and get them to come at me, so the tanks that are situated in the sort of B5, B6 location at our base might be able to get some shots on them, and we get a bit of assistance, we get some nice direct damage, and we do block 280 damage as well. And now we've just come to the safety and the haven of this hill, and it's just shallow enough for us to use the 5 degrees. We're trying to use as much of our 5 degrees as possible, try not to expose ourselves too much. What I'm doing here was a bit risky, going too far forward, so I fall back and now I'm just waiting for my opportunity. We've lost over half our health at the start of the battle, so we do have to be a little bit careful, but we do have a light tank taken out of the game, and it's looking pretty good for our team, so we're just going to be a bit careful. We're getting detected, so we're going to fall back again, reset our sixth sense, and then come up again and try and get some more fire. But I noticed this BMP-1 coming after our medium tank. Going to try and come around the corner and see if I can not help my teammate out here, but there is an M60A3 on that ridgeline, and they have the superior gun depression, superior turret armor, and superior gun, so I'm going to have to try and find a different target to engage. You don't want to pick fights against tanks that are just going to rip you to shreds in this tank, because although you are a pretty good all-rounder with some decent armor, you're definitely not a ridgeline warrior by any means with 5 degrees, and you want to try and pick your engagements carefully. You can bully light tanks and lightly armored medium tanks, and you're very good at side scraping, but apart from that, play support to your heavies and you should get some nice decent results in the TR-580. So we're just sniping at this point. We are down by 1 tank, but it's looking relatively good for our team at the moment. We still have some relatively healthy tanks, so hopefully we're going to be able to take this one down. You can see there the shell velocity at these distances isn't too bad at all, but you do have that horrific pen drop off with the APF SDS round, so I'm waiting for the sort of opportune moment to strike with my gun when tanks are completely flush to the side. I'm trying to go for tracks where possible, and I'm trying to make use of all this hard cover in front of me, popping out, getting a shot off, and then falling back. And you can see here that the gun handling is pretty decent on this tank. That Centurion Mark V got a little bit of turret armor, so it's going to be a struggle with these standard rounds to go through. Going to have to either hit just underneath the gun there to the left and right, or to the cupola on top. and we do have this nice little jutting out piece of rock to try and get our shots off. I could be side scraping there, but I thought it might buck my gun up a little bit as I reverse, so that's why I went around at a 45-degree angle, and if I get detected, someone tries to shoot at me, I can try and use the decent reverse speed to fall back at 45 degrees and hopefully ricochet a shell. We're now going to try and defend our base, because it looks like there are some tanks situated just below our base here that are going to be coming for us. Unfortunately, I didn't account for the pesky light tank. I believe that was at the start of the game to be here. We managed to get one shell into him, but he sets us on fire with that nasty secondary auto cannon. And I'm just going to try and get one round in to finish before I burn out. Unfortunately, I don't. And in that time, the rest of our team capitulated as well, so we're going to have a decent result and a decent defeat, just showing you again that it's a pretty good all-round vehicle and not too bad of a vehicle for a first tank in this line in Era 2. So that's it for this game. I am going to skip ahead to the end and we're going to see how we did. So unfortunately the Sheridan there at the end wasn't able to carry me and the team, but we still had a fairly decent result in a stock TR-580. We finished top of our team with 5.6k direct damage, 1 kill, 1400 assistance, and again we block a little bit of damage at 760, getting a profit with a premium account. And yeah, again just showing you that it's a fairly decent all-round medium tank. So that's it for the second gameplay. We're now going to head on into the third and final gameplay. So we're now into the third and final gameplay of today's video, and we are here in the TR-580 on Alamein in a standard battle, and we're going to head to a sort of central location again to start off the battle, trying to get a bit of vision out, trying to get some early shots at tanks that are making their way into position, and then we can try and pick a flank to support with our fairly good armour and our relatively decent gun and pretty nice DPM. So we're going to head to this ridgeline directly in front of me, where we can try and get a few rounds off and also hopefully get a little bit of assistance. So our light tank does a good job at spotting some tanks crossing towards the north. Unfortunately, we're just a little bit too slow to get there in time to get a decent shot off. We aim pretty well there against that RDFLT, and I'm just going to blame that on the RNG. We take a shot from the back, showing you that your armour definitely is infallible. It's not brilliant, but it's enough to bounce a few rounds, and we're just going to take a little bit of time to try and reset and hopefully get a shot at what is at the back there, trying to take us out. This is a fairly shallow ridge where it's pretty good if we're shooting at tanks in sort of the mid-range, but the tanks that are above us to the back there will be able to shoot down on our armour, and yeah, it's not going to be a good time for us. So we're going to move forward with the mobility, try and push the tempo of the battle a little bit. A lot of our tanks are situated centrally or towards the sort of southwestern corner, so we're going to come here and see if we can not create a little bit of a crossfire, support them and try and get stuck into the battle. It's a tank that definitely can snipe a little bit with the capabilities of the gun, but with the poor penetration and the poor gun depression, you do want to get stuck in situations like this where we're popping up, getting a shot off, popping back down and trying to give the enemies the smallest portion of our tank to shoot, a well-angled upper plate and a turret, and hopefully getting some ricochets. We managed to get a few rounds there at that M60A1 and we get a little bit of assistance, and now we can push up and support this T72 and hopefully get a few rounds into the tanks up here. We pop up, spot what's up there, and then we're going to We're definitely going to try and find a position to use the 5 degrees of gun depression that this tank has, and this is where it can become a little bit awkward. We do have to drop back down though and support our T72A as that light tank comes around their back. He gets set on fire, but we also set the enemy light tank on fire. We pop our smoke screen there to try and disorientate the enemy just a little bit, as we are now going to push round to the left here. And hopefully this light tank's dragging around a tank for us, and we're going to be able to take advantage of what he's bringing around for us. So always making use of the free cam in these situations, looking what's in the distance that might be able to get shots on us if I come round the corner. And there's an M60A2 in the back, which is a tank that you definitely don't want to getting to a sort of one-on-one engagement where they're hull down and we're having to try and make do with 5 degrees of gun depression. So keeping our head on a swivel here. We don't want to give that M60A to our side, but we definitely still want to try and get as many shots in as possible. I'm taking advantage of when tanks are looking away or they're retreating, like this 30B2 Farad here. We managed to get a nice shot into the rear. It looks like we either damaged his engine or fuel tank, or someone else did. And always try and aim for modules if you know where they are. That can get you some nice fires and critical damage, and definitely some nice ammo racks if you're firing ATGMs in other vehicles. But bringing my attention back to the TR-580, we are now just supporting tanks that are spotting at the forefront of the battle here, and trying to put our gun and our DPM to work. We're trying to pop up, give again as little of our tank as possible to the enemy when we are getting detected. I'm not trying to sit around on ridge lines for too long. I don't want to get tracked in this position, and it's definitely a dangerous position if I was to get YOLO'd here, because the tanks, or the medium tanks behind me, are too far behind me to be able to be of much use to me right here. So we're just going to fall back using the decent reverse speed. Fortunately, that RDFLT gets taken out, and now maybe we can come round. We get a nice snapshot there into that Farad. We only take tracking damage there, so hopefully that was the extra spaced armor on the tracks that helped us not take any damage. And now I'm going to do a little bit of reverse side scraping. So just side scraping the other way around. It means that obviously the hole is the part that they're not going to be able to see, and hopefully they're not going to be able to catch the end of my tank. We're going to stop, try and aim in for as long as possible there as we are in the open ground. We don't want to get caught outside on against 30B2 Farad. Take him out, and now we can advance the battle just that little bit more. Enemy M30A2 at the back there. He is tracked, so we're going to come over. I'm going to go for the tracks, try and keep resetting this track so we get some assistance at the end of the game. And hopefully we should be able to take out this heavy tank and get all of the lovely juicy damage at the end of this battle. We take him out, and now it's just one enemy light tank remaining. We are having a pretty decent game in this tank, showing you the capabilities of this all-round sort of heavy and medium tank. There is the one light tank left. We're not going to be able to spot the light tank before he spots us, so we're going to have to be careful when we do get detected. We get detected now, so what I'm going to do is swivel round, and I'm going to use this destructible cover to protect me from ATGMs. This BMP2 is hopefully firing an ATGM at us. He does, and it gets caught in the destructible cover there, and that was definitely planned. That's one of my 5 head moments, the only one that I have. I have one a month, and that's it. So yeah, it worked out well for us there, but we managed to come through that game with a nice profit, with or at a premium account, the Mastery badge. We picked up 5.4k direct damage, 1828 assistance, and we blocked again a little bit of damage, showing you the armor can work occasionally. And we managed to have a decent result with a victory here on Alamein in the third and final battle of today's video. So thank you to everyone for watching this tank guide. If it's been helpful to you, let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, I will see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.